Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nicole Cantatori. I'm the head of culture and engagement at WRMC, formerly known as Worth Ross Management Company. Also joining me tonight is Jack Thuet, who is our VP of Business Development. I'm very excited to welcome you all to our March Speaker Series event. If this is your first time joining us, we are so glad to have you. Welcome. So these exclusive events for those that are first timers are designed to bring industry leading experts to the forefront, offering valuable insights, best practices, and an opportunity for you to ask questions. Our speakers are carefully selected for their understanding of the unique challenges and opportunities association boards and managers face. Before we dive in, I want to mention that we are recording this session and it will be available to all board members along with all of the other webinar series in our speaker series. So our goal is to ensure that every board member has the resources they need to lead their communities effectively. So that brings me to tonight's event. Friends don't let friends defer maintenance. Gotta love that title, right? So joining with me is Matt Blackmer, the CEO of Higgins and Associates. Matt, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Nicole.
Absolutely. So the format will be similar to our previous events. Matt will present, and then at the end, we'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to send those in the chat, and I will be monitoring those, and we will address those during the Q&A portion. So with that being said, Matt, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Great. Thank you. Again, I appreciate being here and for the invite from WRMC and hopefully give you some ideas of things to look for and items to help you get through these challenges. So our agenda tonight, I've been trying to stick to this for the most part. I sometimes I go off on a tangent, but hopefully not. Deferred maintenance discussion. We'll kind of talk about what it is. You'll probably learn pretty quick about what I think about it, probably by the title. But anyway, and then common red flags and also some building enclosure maintenance things that a lot of people face. So I just want to give you an idea of items to look for and some typical life cycles for that. I'll go through some case studies. I talk about case studies, but they're really things we've seen where deferred maintenance have caused a bigger issue down the road. So hopefully that'll help you understand some of the pitfalls of that. A little bit about us. We shameless plug about Higgins and Associates. We are forensic engineers and consultants. We do about a third rehab work and consulting for HOAs, about a third for insurance companies where we look at cause of damage and how to fix it. And then we do litigation and consulting too. So we work on construction defect cases and slip and falls and personal injury, things like that. So we do a little bit of everything. Right now, we're right about 15 to 20 people on staff. I think we just hired three, I believe, in the last month. So we're growing pretty fast. If you know any good engineers out there, that need a new company, let me know. So we're always looking for good people. We're a preferred vendor for WRMC. We really like doing that, and they're a great company to work with. We have several projects with them right now. As I mentioned, we do forensic analysis, expert witness testimony. We have expertise in structural, civil, geotechnical, building envelope. We do some cost consulting as well. A lot of investigations over the years. I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. You can probably tell by the gray beard, but we have a lot of people and a lot of experience. And right now, our headquarters is in Denver. We've got several people here in Dallas. I'm in Dallas at this point, and we're trying to expand probably into Phoenix and maybe another location in the next couple of years. Here's an idea of some of the staff. This will all be here. I won't go through everybody. I think Nicole will provide this presentation either on YouTube or others. So you're welcome to see some of our staff and how we can help. A little more plugging still here. Again, we do a lot of repair and rehab design. That's primarily for HOAs and building owners. That's anything from long-term damage, deferred maintenance, upgrades, things like that. A lot of repairs after litigation where there's a settlement money and where we're trying to put that money to best use. We also consult with during construction, doing quality assurance and observation so that it's done right at that point. And then some other items as well, but that kind of gives you an idea of what we do. Okay, so usually when we talk to HOAs, they say, well, engineers are expensive. Maybe, but maybe not. A lot of what we do saves money in the future. The key is determining what the exact source of the issue is, not paying contractors to fix a problem that isn't there or continuously having to fix the same issue. We see that quite a bit. And then owners are upset that the issues aren't addressed. So we can help get through that process quickly. We also want to do where we can provide the most cost effective repair solution, not necessarily where you just go in and rip everything out. A lot of times we have people that are trying to figure out how to repair, like for instance, a stucco cladding. Do you have to repair the whole thing, replace the whole thing? Can you just do perimeters and penetrations? Just things like that. Like what's the best way to take the money that is hard to come by in HOAs and put it to best use? And again, what are the material options? Can you phase it? What are long-term maintenance options? This is really in that instance, right, where we're talking short-term and long-term maintenance. We'll dive into that a little bit today to really get that figured out. And engineers, we can also, ensure apples to apples proposals. A lot of times I'm sure you've dealt with where you get three proposals or five proposals and they range from 50 grand to 200,000 and you don't know what each one's included, what's the cost, what do you really need to do? And so we can help tighten up that scope of work by providing plans and how to do that. So topic tonight, deferred maintenance. Again, how I define it anyway is postponing repairs on a building or property, right? And usually that's due to budget constraints. There may be other issues too, but we seems like from our standpoint, that's usually where it comes down to either a budget issue or just not knowing what to do. I think it's a pretty daunting task for HOAs and HOA boards to figure out where to spend the money, right? You got a fiduciary responsibility to do the right thing for the community. And you're like, well, we don't know what to repair, what's really required, what can be pushed down the road. And I know that's a lot of what we do. And that's where we try to help and put through those issues and figure out how to phase things and what you really need to repair and what you don't. But again, the deferred maintenance issue where it just is kicking the can down the road, that's where things can go wrong, right? Where we'll show in some of these case studies where you get worse or significant damage due to just not doing anything, right? And I think in a lot of that deferred maintenance is either conscious or it's unconscious, meaning we really don't have the money to fix it, so push it down the road, or you just don't know that there are damage there that needs to be maintained. So I think that's where a lot of this comes out. But deferred maintenance can also lead to increased costs and potential life safety issues. We've found some of those where, for instance, you may have a railing around a balcony that hasn't been addressed or maintained or fixed over the years, and now it's loose and people can potentially fall. So we've seen where that can happen as well. So there's just things to look for. I also find quite often that the historical knowledge of that property isn't transferred between boards. I don't know how often they shift, or it could be yearly. It's a volunteer position usually, and one board may know that there are a lot of issues, and the next one doesn't. And I think that kind of transfer of power sort of gets lost in a lot of these. And I think most often it's due to lack of funding, right? And I don't know, it's typically where there's either not enough money in the reserves or the reserve studies don't necessarily address all the items that need to be done. But then when you're faced with something that hasn't been maintained, you're not only lacking the money for maintenance, you're lacking money for the major repair. And now you're looking at either assessments or loans or whatever to get that funding. So again, in my mind, deferred maintenance is not the best practice, just because somebody's usually left holding the bag later. So again, some of it, potential issues, reduced quality or deterioration of the property. I know people get really frustrated when they pop up later down the road and now you're talking a bigger repair. Costly emergency repairs, depending if you have something that needs to be shored or temporarily supported. Now you're dealing with, a building department and requirements for safety and different things. That we have a couple of those going on. Safety hazards we talked about, compliance issues, building code violations. We had one recently we worked on where Army Corps of Engineers got involved, and now they're now they're in the middle of everything, having to fix, and the HOA stuck with additional costs due to that. Again, increased long-term repair costs. What might have been a relatively minor repair can escalate, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the presentation. But it just takes something that may have been a few $1,000s now. It could be 50, 100, $1 million, depending down the road. And so you just got to be real careful on what's rightly deferred and what really can't be deferred. And I think that's the key, is how do you maneuver through that? And hopefully we can give you a little guidance there today, but maybe even if nothing else, when to ask for help, right? And when to get more information on how to defer that. I think part of it is developing a maintenance plan and funding mechanisms. I think part of it is right up front. You don't even know necessarily what needs to be maintained. A lot of times developers don't hand, especially on newer projects, don't hand over a book of what needs to be repaired, what the typical life cycles are, how long your roof's going to last, how long mechanical equipment's going to last, how often do you have to regrade, what are the roofing issues, what are the balcony issues. There's a lot that goes into that. And so funding that and putting reserves, yearly for that, I think is key. And then what's the inspection schedule? A lot of that can be from a consultant, or whether it's engineering or architects, or there's building consultants out there too. But how often do you need to have things inspected? Is that a yearly, every 5 years, 10 years? A lot of that can be part of the reserve study process as well. And then definitely perform preventative maintenance. There's pieces that you can perform that, don't put it off if it's something that's fairly minor now, but can lead to future damage in the future, like sealant joints, for instance, or other cladding repairs. And then again, informing parties, and I think keeping good track within the HOA boards or management companies, whoever does that, keeping all that information transferred between boards and between members, I think is key. I kind of liken this to, kind of in deferred maintenance, car maintenance is often a good analogy, where you gotta replace the oil and do an oil change and an oil filter every so often, and that's maybe it's $100 every 6 months or whatever, but that'll save you $20,000 in an engine, right? So it's one of those. It's kind of a good analogy to think of. It's just your building and your life cycle may be slightly different, but it's a very similar issue. Again, where do you start? I think part of it is an inventory of the property's assets. In a high rise or in even some of your mid rises, you've got roofs, you've got claddings, and those could be, brick, stucco, stone. You've got balconies, waterproofing. You may have pools, you have pool equipment, you have HVAC systems, you have concrete, you have grading and drainage, you have irrigation systems. You could have asphalt, parking areas. There are a lot of things, but getting that list put together of what are the property's assets and what their life cycles are and what the typical maintenance for each one of those, I think, is key in developing a maintenance program. And again, once you have those assets, performing condition assessment. And so there's a lot of companies that do this, not just engineering or architects. There's reserve study people, and there's a way to get around that as far as getting something put together, whether it's in a book or, I'm dating myself, right? I do everything in writing on paper, but whether it's in a book or a binder or on a network somewhere, at least keep all that information somewhere. And then how do you prioritize it, right? Even when we're doing repair, we're doing just that. We're prioritizing conditions. We may have damage to multiple components of a building. We have to prioritize which ones are really needed right now and which ones we can push down the road. And then what are the costs? You may need a ROM, rough order of magnitude, and then long-term planning. Again, this is a good map of what normal maintenance. You may have 50% maintenance or deterioration over a longer time, and then 100% deterioration. If you defer the maintenance on it, it shortens it a lot, right? That's your engine failure, is kind of the red, for lack of a better term. So hopefully I didn't go through that too fast. I have a tendency to talk fast, at least when I'm on the stand doing litigation. Sometimes the judges ask me to slow down, so I'll try to. Hopefully you can understand what I'm going through here. Red flags, keep an eye on water. I had an older engineer that helped train me, 25 years ago. He always said water is malicious. And I always remember that, because it seems like most of the problems we see is due to long-term water. And you've got your immediate issues, and then you've got long-term. So keep an eye on these things. This is one of those where you want to stop the water before it gets through, because the longer it's through concrete, the more corrosion, steel reinforcing is corroded you're dealing with than a structural concern, not just a waterproofing concern. So keep an eye on that. That's something that you want to address from a maintenance standpoint. Who knows what's above this, right? Typically it's a pool, planters, grading and drainage, plaza decks. There's numerous sources typically on this type of issue on a parking garage. Look for interior finishes. Oops, and sorry, throwing stuff. Interior finishes and door windows. Look for cracks. Look for damage to the foundation systems. That may be something that can be maintained from a grading and drainage and water control standpoint versus a complete repair to the foundation system. Look for brick cracks. Look for separations. These are a little extreme on some of these photos, but again, these are all indications that we get out there like, geez, this isn't an old condition. This has been going on for a while, and it's not just brand new. So it's something to keep an eye on things before they get to this condition. Look for cracks. This is where we get, older parking garages are susceptible to a lot of damage. You can see cracks down in here, cracks in a lot of the transfer beams. Some of these end up monitoring. Again, a lot of these can be patched or be addressed earlier without significant repairs. Here's some of that documentation. We talked about water through slabs. You get this corrosion, and then your concrete starts falling apart. And that's something to keep an eye on, where now you're talking more of a structural issue and a structural repair versus just keeping the water out, which could have been done earlier on. Occasionally we get out there and we see this type of condition where you've got concrete spalling, and this was a university, actually, some of the housing, but a lot of this is something to look for and what can be repaired prior. Again, water is malicious. I'll keep saying it. I say it a lot, and it's usually what causes a lot of this damage. Look for membranes, traffic membranes, traffic coatings, TPO, EPDM, roofing, anywhere where water can get in. And efflorescence is this white material you can see here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but efflorescence is where salts are drugged through the concrete by water. It's transferred through and it's deposited on the other side. So if you see efflorescence somewhere or other water staining, it's something you want to address from a maintenance side. Oops, jumped right past. So building enclosure maintenance, I'll give you a feel. I'll probably blow through some of this pretty quick, just so we can get to some case studies and leave some time for questions. But in a typical building, this is just a 3-story here or 2-story, but there are a lot of conditions in the building enclosure. And when we say building enclosure, it's the building envelope. It's everything that protects the interior of the building. You've got roof systems, you have parapets, you have scuppers and downspouts, you have cladding, control joints, railings, decks, balconies, windows and doors, grading and drainage, water table flashing. There's so many, what I'm trying to get at it, there's so many avenues for water in your building cladding systems and your building enclosure systems that it's something to keep on the top of your mind for maintenance. And the reason being is, again, water is malicious. So once water's in, now you've got damages to interior components, potentially have biological growth. If it's a wood framing member, we have some of those going right now where, some of the HOAs dealing with people about to instigate litigation because there's biological growth inside their units, things like that. So again, keep the water out and keeping that maintained is key. Don't defer that maintenance if at all possible. Horizontal systems, this next section here goes into just to give you an idea of types of systems that require maintenance. And this is in that building envelope range, but horizontal systems could be anything. You could put water repellents on them. A lot of people think concrete is waterproof. It is not. It actually allows a lot of water through. That's why there's typically a membrane or some other waterproofing system below slabs if it's elevated. You may have, we talked about it earlier, sheet product, waterproofing, EPDM, TPO, BUR, built-up roof. So these are all roof systems. You could have fluid applied products, and you have hot and cold applied split slabs. So a lot of times you'll get slabs that are over top of membranes and drainage mats and things like that. There's not really a direct maintenance for those, but you need to try and keep water from above and make sure water is discharged away from the systems. This is a pedestal system on the lower left here where it's over an EPDM membrane, but a lot of your plaza decks go this direction where you have drains and a way to direct the water to those drains below. So again, those are ways to maintain. You need to maintain the drains, make sure there's no leaks in the systems. You're not going to take it all up, but if you do identify a spot where there's water, definitely attack that. Water repellents are more like siloxane and silane sealers. So if originally these were installed, that's something that has to be reapplied every half year to 7 years. We say half because a lot of times things are just not applied right. So there are items that, ice can damage it, cleaning can damage it, things like that. So if it's just a waterproofing sealer or water repellent sealer, again, that's something that you have to put on the maintenance schedule. EPDM is a roofing membrane, is what this is, kind of a rubber roof, in lack of a better term, 30 to 50 year life, right? So if you have plaza decks or roofs or things like that with these type of systems, you got to maintain them once a year, clean them, spot repair, visual inspections, check for seams, and then you're still going to have to replace probably at that 30 to 50 years. So you need to reserve for not only maintenance, but also for replacement. TPOs are similar. There's a little less length, a 20 to 30 year life. They don't like UV very well, so they deteriorate in the hot sun a little quicker than the EPDM. Again, maintenance, at least once a year, clean it, inspect it, spot repairs, check all the seams, very typical. Again, you're trying to keep the water out again and make sure you've got proper slope and none of the warranties are being voided. Built up roofs, we talked a little bit about it. It's an older type of system, but again, they're about 20, 30 year, again, yearly maintenance. Make sure there are no conditions where water is getting in. Traffic and pedestrian coatings. We deal with this a lot, especially with parking garage and high rise. Sometimes your pedestrian coatings are on balconies or parking garages. They're usually only good for about 5 to 10 years. So they get damaged by ice. You need to clean them properly, inspect them, and make sure that they're working too. So it's one of those to plan ahead that those are going to have to be replaced and potentially spot repairs as well. Definitely different types of coatings that have various characteristics. I won't go through all these, but let's just say there's quite a few. So again, you need to understand or have somebody help you through what are the maintenance for each of the different types of waterproofing and building enclosure systems, and what's the inspection protocol and how often and what needs to be done. And service lives vary 5 to 25 years. So it's a big range, right? It's daunting task to figure out what everything you've got on a large building. Building enclosures, split slabs, you're not going to really see much. This is where you have a slab over a membrane that drains out. I just want to show that that's another system that it's pretty heavy life, 50 year, but you may have some maintenance related to that too. This is what happens when it's not maintained. This is actually a result of a construction defect here, but we had to remove the topping slabs. So you're chipping out concrete. You're repairing all the waterproofing down underneath that had holes and was leaking. There were some defects in the seams, and then you have to install a new drain mat and topping slab. So it's a heavy repair once things go bad. So again, part of this is related to a construction defect, but at the same time, you've got maintenance to flashings and to other waterproofing components, where the railings are, how the railings penetrate through these slabs. You definitely want to have these things looked at from an inspection sequence. Okay, cool. I think we're doing pretty good on time. We got another 15 or so through case studies. That'll be about perfect. So I call these case studies to really just give you an idea of things we see. These are kind of, so it's not so dry and a bunch of words. I get some photos of damage here, which everybody likes. I try to cover several different types of buildings here. This is a 2-story townhomes building. They had leakage for years, and it kept happening. I think they hired contractors several times to try to fix it. There was potentially a roof leak, potentially another leak at some flashings on a balcony. No real maintenance happening, but they've been trying to figure it out. So we finally got called out. It's in this area, which when you go out and look, you really don't see much. You can see there's a little bit of, sealant issues here around the window, potentially. Nothing really going on. Somebody tried to put a big sealant joint here between the two types of brick, but nothing obvious from the outside. Here you've got, though, when you got up on top, we could see a lot of standing water. I don't know if you can see this. This was after no real rain. There's still water here, but you can tell it's wicking up into the wood here. We ended up finding that there were some seams back in the flashing here. You could see this maintenance, I'll call it maintenance, where sealant had been gooped up along the joint for quite some time. This really should have been pulled out, part of the brick to flash properly up the wall and redone this around the threshold. Again, this is one of those where we talk about, this is what's inside at the lower level. So you can definitely tell water's getting in. You see some staining here, but once it was finally pulled, you can see the biological growth and the rotted framing up in this area. So The problem here is without the maintenance on the outside and letting water continually infiltrate, now we've got biological growth, unhappy owners, and now we're into framing repairs and other issues. So I think if anything you take away from today, you'll see how much I love deferred maintenance, but also just in general is please try not to push, kick the can and try to find what the actual repair is, whether that's hiring architects, engineers, building consultants that know what they need to do, or there are contractors that know what to do too, but definitely want to get a handle on it and fix the actual issue. Here's another case study. These are low-rise condominiums. Originally, they had a BUR built-up roof. We talked about that earlier. And somewhere along the line, within the last 5 years, they covered the roofs with TPO membrane. So it's a white, flexible membrane. Ended up seeing now that they got a leakage into the units and the membranes themselves are failing. We ended up finding out that there's no roof slope to the drains, which is allowing a lot of ponding water, which avoids the warranty. So now a roof that should have a warranty and should last, 20 to 30 years, as we looked at on that previous slide, doesn't have a warranty anymore, and now is allowing water to come into the units, and we're looking at having to replace them. So now the HOA is looking at a large cost to replace the roofs and the downspouts. This gives you an idea. This was after some rain. You can tell each one of these spots here, I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, are low spots. And I put a level on all these buildings. You can see how many there are. There's about 20 buildings. They're all flat or negatively sloped. So the problem is, again, you're voided warranty. Now you got water infiltrating into the buildings. There's about 2 to 3 inches of standing water here. So again, these haven't been maintained either. So the water hasn't been removed, which really you shouldn't have to, but there's a lot of debris up there and items that can puncture the roof itself as well. So they haven't been maintained either, as you can see here. So a lot of these are the scuppers here. I don't know if you can tell right by my level, but that's the only way these roofs drain, or through these small scuppers. And there aren't enough of those either. So we have several issues. Not only is there a lot of debris buildup from a lack of maintenance, there's no slope to the drains, and now the warranty's voided. So now the HOA is stuck with a roof that's really only about 5 years old and having to replace it instead of getting another 20 years of use out of it. You can give an idea here too. And when this is iced up, so this was a cold morning here in Dallas. And so this is one of those where you've got all this ponding water, but now you've got ice, and these membranes don't like ice either. So again, that's why water is supposed to be removed from these roofs within 24 hours. That's with proper drainage, proper slope. And again, here we are. This is a good one too. I think when I showed Jack and Nicole, they liked this one. This is part of the install too. You can tell that the scupper and this is detached, and they've also got some issues with the mansard roof covering too. But even if they could get water to the scuppers, almost all of the downspouts were not attached. So water would just be dumping onto the roof and down below. You can also tell that some interesting roof coverings have been used down here at the sheds as well. So again, this is a property that you can tell probably doesn't have a lot of funds and now is facing a chunk of cash to fix all these roof systems. Another high-rise pool and plaza deck. You guys probably think I only see negative stuff, but it's funny. We usually only get called when things go wrong, so you got to understand my lens that I look at things. So anyway, high-rise pool and plaza deck constructed in 08. The original design and construction. This one actually went through litigation. Litigation was reportedly settled. I don't believe there was still evidence of water intrusion below the plaza deck, even after original construction. We had raised planters, plaza deck surface itself, and the coping around the pool were potential leak sources. So that's been an ongoing issue since 2008. During the time of litigation, there were varying degrees of corrosion and structural steel in the cold form steel framing that supports the whole plaza deck for the pool. And that was early on where that was happening due to the water leaks and a lack of ventilation. We don't know, at least from my knowledge, we don't know where the funds from the litigation settlement went, but they weren't used to address the defects under the crawl space, is what I know. So now we've got 2008 construction, leaking, lack of ventilation and corrosion for that many years, and no maintenance, no repairs done. And now we're facing a much bigger repair. I'll show you the photos. But now the HOA is dealing with more structural damage than they would have back in, call it 2013. And it's still leaking, and there's still no ventilation, and so nothing's really been done, and now it's a big cost. So now we've got to go in, and we're actually in the middle of designing significant structural steel beam repairs and waterproofing and some other issues. So there you can see on the left, this was back in 2012-ish. And now we're seeing, this was into last year when I first got down in there. You can tell these beams now are corroding, and now you've got holes through them. So now this structure is gone pretty much. So these are all going to have to come out. And so that's a big, where this could have been more than likely shot blasted and cleaned and fixed in place. Now we've got areas that are going to have to completely be removed, which means shutting down a pool, shutting down a spa, and yanking out the plaza deck to get to it. Again, here you've got this. You still can see some original beam here back in 2012. So we had a shot at actually being able to fix this pretty easy. Now we got a lot more damage here in 2024. I don't know if you can quite tell up here, but all this top flange of the steel's pretty much gone as well. So again, this is all got to be ripped out now for the most part. A little bit of corrosion on the posts. This could have been cleaned and fixed in place. Now we've got actually got some shoring in here, temporary shoring. So we're worried about some collapse issues. So we had to do that, and we had to get all this cleaned so we could measure some of the damages as well. But again, long term, now we've got an additional 10 years of damage. There's still water standing in here, which means the leaks weren't fixed, and so now we're dealing with that. You can tell all this corrosion as well. So all of this is going to have to be fixed as part of our repair work. This, we actually had some of that. I don't know if you noticed the previous one, but we went ahead and had this cleaned to see if we could save anything. So this is after it's been shot blasted. It's kind of interesting to see how much of the beam is gone. Again, these are structural steel members, the big red iron steel that you see when going up on buildings that is pretty much gone now after 10, 15 years. And here you can see some of the beam. This is just all corroded. So now we're essentially, what I wanted to tell you and what can come out of it is that, the funds weren't used to repair this, and now the HOA is dealing with a much bigger cost to repair than would have been 10 years ago. MSC retaining wall, we get into a lot of retaining walls too. So we're not just doing structures and claddings. Retaining wall issues are pretty common. I know you guys have a lot of screen walls here too. I see them all the time. But retaining walls and screen walls are always a big issue. Again, the HOA is usually responsible for maintaining it. This one had an MSC is a mechanically stabilized earth wall. You see some of these around. They're block walls essentially, but the drainage from the roof downspouts were not maintained right, and all the water from the buildings were dumping into this wall. And so the grading wasn't maintained, the downspout directions weren't maintained. The wall failed, and the homeowners above the building essentially sued the HOA for lack of maintenance. So again, here's where something wasn't maintained, wasn't fixed, and now you've got litigation and you have a wall failure. So here you can kind of see from these are the older photos that came out during the litigation of what was starting to happen. I don't know if you remember previously what I was trying to tell you, but here's that white material, which is efflorescence, which is the salt that is brought through the material with water. So this is indication that there's a lot of water being dumped behind this wall. You can see it here too on this bottom one. So what's happening above is this grading and drainage wasn't being properly maintained, and water was being dumped into the backfill of the retaining wall. So that's a big thing we see a lot down here in Dallas and surrounding areas as well. And here you can see some of the older ones. So this is what started to happen when they failed. And the problem is with a lot of these walls, you've got building foundations right above it, right? So when these walls fail, not only do you have to deal with just the wall, you're now underpinning or trying to temporarily support the wall, the building itself. We've got one of these in Irving right now that we had to underpin the building, and now we're trying to fix the wall itself, and we're finally getting into construction in about the next month. So they get very costly because it's not just the wall that's damaged. You can see how invasive this is. So this is the replacement of those walls when we finally got out there. And you can see how close we are. These are townhome buildings, but it gives you an idea of all the work that has to go into just replacing the wall, let alone dealing with anything, slabs. You can see a patio slab hanging in the air here. So you got to deal with all this, and all these people up on top of the hill were not happy. And essentially that's where the litigation started. Understandably so. But again, water's malicious, even to retaining walls. High-rise buildings have a lot of those here, obviously. Usually balcony issues. This one's about a balcony. We have water infiltration on the edges, edges not sealed, no expansion joints. So again, the lamination of the tiles are part of the big issue here. I don't know if you can kind of see here but this is tinted. Here's a close up. So all the balcony, or I'd say 2/3 at least of the balcony um, tiles are tinting like this and debonding from the substrate due to water getting in here. So we're getting water in from the edge, which I'll show you in a minute, as well as flashings at the edge and the other pieces. So none of this has got a waterproofing or a repellent on the tiles either. Just like I said, concrete's not waterproof, neither are tiles. So that's part of the issue too, is maintaining and keeping water out of these systems. Because even though we don't get a lot of freeze thaw down here, we still get it, and this will debond. So we have about 400 and some balconies on a high rise that are going to have to be likely repaired. Here you get another idea on the left of it doing it. The edges are like this. This is where some of the tiles have been removed and not put back from a maintenance standpoint. And this gives you an idea on the side where water is getting in and popping it. The one on the right is where some of the tiles have been removed on one that we're repairing right now. But again, water is malicious and can cause a lot of damage to even just balcony coverings. We have here mid-rise buildings. So this is another previous litigation case. We see a lot of these where no repairs were conducted after the litigation settlement. It seems like every time we ask that question, nobody knows where the funds went, but I guess somebody else can deal with that. But now we've got long-term water damage, again, another 10 years plus of damage that was identified in the litigation that nothing's happened, and now you've got another 10 years of damage. Balcony, stucco cladding. There's another one where the interior units have some biological growth, and now you've got unit owners where they potentially have biological growth issues inside and threatening litigation. I don't know if you can quite tell here, but you can tell here that they got water staining down the windows. I believe water's getting in around the windows, around penetrations. This is buckling. I don't know if you can quite tell, but the stucco is actually separating and about to come off this area of the building. And right now, I believe this HOA, just for this vertical stack here, if you can see what I'm circling, these three, they have a bid for about 150 grand to come in here and remove and replace this. So now they're facing big costs and looking for our help, obviously, of what do we need to fix? How much of the cladding needs to come off? What do we need to do with the windows? What about the balconies? We just talked about those two. Well, now we have balcony issues too. And this is, about 10 to 15 years of damage now. This is all biological growth staining. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we get to tear some of this apart and see how bad it is, because more than likely this wood framing in these balconies are rotted out. So again, this was all identified in the litigation and nothing was done. So that maintenance or repair was deferred or ignored or whatever. And now they're facing more than likely complete replacement of waterproofing and decks, probably structural framing issues, probably recladding of the stucco as well. You can tell water's getting in quite a bit of this. In some of even the walkway areas over here, you can see rust and staining, white staining down the side. So this is going to take some intrusive testing and some research to try and figure out how far our repairs are going to need to go. But that's where we're at now, right? Is what's the repair? How do we prioritize that? How do you phase it? Where's the money going to come from? All that fun stuff. So a quick summary here. I think I'm doing pretty good on time. Again, know the property, know the structure type, try to figure out your property site components, and all of which require some sort of maintenance, and what that maintenance is and what the interval is, what's the inspection interval, what needs to be done. That's all key to all this. And again, understanding what areas are most susceptible to damage. Anything exposed to water is most susceptible to damage. Skyward facing elements like your balconies, your decks, your courtyards, parking garages, roofs, and areas that can accommodate heavy rains are also an issue. And definitely get a handle on and understand the schedule for maintenance, inspections, replacement. I can guarantee if you don't have money in there for maintenance in the reserves, you definitely don't have money for major replacements when the maintenance isn't done. So I think part of that is, if nothing else, I'm hoping to make an understanding around here of try to figure out how and what needs to be maintained and address any major repairs as soon as possible. And here's my plug again. Understand when it's time to call a consultant, right? Whether that's an architect, whether that's us, whoever that is, we need help, ask for it. So there I am. Like pretty good, 45. So you want me to stop sharing, Nicole, or what's the best
Actually,
way
you
to?
can leave it there because you may have to
Okay.
refer
Okay.
back to some
Sounds good.
slides from the questions. There's 3 questions so far, but it may trigger more. This
Okay.
summary page actually, I think, may tie a little bit in to the question, this first question,
Sure.
Matt. And it says historical knowledge of issues and the basis of decisions is often not transferred between boards. And I've heard this before.
Yeah.
And that's a big issue. So what do you recommend as some best practices? And I'm looking at this summary and you kind of went over a few, but I know
Yeah.
you've been doing this for a long time. So could you kind of throw out of just a few best practices that you know that have worked in the
Yeah.
past?
Sure. I think part of it is keeping a good log and file system somehow, whether that's, engineering reports, consultant reports, reserve study reports, things like that. And, I would suggest if there's a way to, have a meeting or almost a transfer meeting, right, between the previous board and the next board as that happens. We've seen this happen too, where they kind of come in and talk about those issues, right? And say, look, here's everything we have. Here's the binder for all the roofs. Here's the binder for the balconies. Here's what we know. Here's what we think happened a few boards back. We've seen that work pretty well. And I think it's all documentation. It's like with everything. If there's a file, whether it's electronic or not, just what's the next thing? What the worst part is what we don't want is where you get boards, which I had somebody tell me this a couple months ago. It's like, we're not going to address it because I'm leaving the board in a couple months anyway, so it'll be their problem, right? So that there's that attitude somehow, and I get it sometimes because people just get tired of dealing with it, and it's a volunteer position. But I think the best thing is keeping. It's almost a project manual, right? There's oftentimes, and if people have been involved with bigger construction and new construction, quite often the builders and developers will provide the owners with almost a project manual, right? That shows, okay, here's the type of roof that was installed. Here's when it needs to be maintained. Here's some inspection guidelines, all of that. It's almost if that can be created through either reserve studies or through consultants, I think that's the best practice. And then that documentation and that manual, so to speak, that the boards can use and refer to is transferred, year after year through the boards.
Yeah, that's good points. I
Yeah.
know there is a comment that came up, and I saw that there was a response to it, wanting to know what is WRMC's role in transferring
Mm.
institutional knowledge and establish an inspection schedule. So, and that's something that you can actually offline, we can reach out a little bit more specifics with your board members that are wanting to know that with your director or with your general manager. But we definitely have processes where it's documented, strategic documentation, and also tactical planning. That is monumental, especially when you're transitioning from one board to another board. So I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah.
Another question that came up is regarding preventative maintenance is, I know there's a big focus, like you showed the pictures on the high rise. So are there any new ideas for preventing the water issues or dealing with blockage regarding horizontal lines?
Um, I don't know of any new. I think that, and if we're talking about horizontal conditions, like if we talk about roofs, the key there is just maintenance, right? And keeping up on it, periodic, whether it's yearly. Typically, you want to look at those yearly and make sure there aren't any leaks, and just have a plan to address that. As far as concrete issues and over components, if they're done right, you really shouldn't have a lot of maintenance. And when I'm talking about that, I think which slide I understand they are talking about. Maybe I
Mhm.
can go back to that. But essentially, it's once water is in and can get down into the either the drainage mat or the drains or everything else. If it's all working right and was installed properly, there really isn't maintenance for that. It's really if there's a puncture or something happens or all of a sudden there's a leak. Now you're starting to tear it up to address it. I think the key here that I was trying to get at is if you do identify there's a leak down below, that's when to attack it is right then. Don't just let it keep happening and happening because then it just gets worse and worse. From a lot of those systems aren't really maintenance system, meaning if you have a concrete slab over a membrane and a drainage mat, you're not really going to maintain that, right? But the only thing you can do is potentially put a traffic coating over it or some membrane that's a penetrating sealer. But again, if the water is managed, everything should be a moisture managed or water managed system, meaning if it's properly designed and constructed, the water, if it gets in and you can't see it, get the water out. there should be a way for the water to discharge. If it's a different system, if it's a barrier system like a roof system, then you just have to drain it off. So each one's a little different, so it's a little hard to answer that question. I think there are advancements, always in construction. For instance, instead of having it, I'll go back to my topping slab thing where I showed all of it broken up on that photo. If you have a topping slab, I much rather see the pedestal system, which I showed a second ago, where it's a pedestal paver system over top of a membrane. So then anytime you have any damage or any maintenance, all you have to do is pull up a couple pedestals, fix your membrane, and put them back. You're not tearing out in a complete concrete slab system. So I think that's one advancements that's happened over the last, I don't know, even, and Jack knows this too, because he has a world in building envelope consulting too. But it's probably over the last 10, 15, 20 years, that's really become a bigger focus versus split slab systems. So there are some advancements there. And it really just depends. You're kind of stuck as an HOA board. You're stuck with what was designed and installed to some extent. So you have to do the best you can on identifying what you have and what the maintenance for that particular component is.
Great summary there, Matt. Now I'm going to jump in and catch this next question, Nicole, because a moment ago you mentioned barrier systems, and Tom on our team asked if you could talk a little bit about EIFS, and I think it's an important distinction to talk about drainable versus barrier EIFS. So I'll kick that over to you.
Yeah, we can do that. So back in the day, I'll really go back a ways, they originally installed barrier systems, which meant that water could not penetrate the system because once water got in, it couldn't get out. And that's where all the original EIFS litigation happened back and got banned in a lot of types of construction, especially for wood framing and different things. That was back in the, I don't even remember, it's probably 30 years ago. But so now or they should be anyway, most all of your stucco and EIFS systems are drainable, moisture managed systems, meaning that I don't say it's okay, you try to keep the water out, but if water gets in, you've got the proper flashings, weather resistive barrier, drainage mats, whatever those components are behind the stucco and behind that cladding, that if errant water gets behind, it has a way to get out. And that means you've got weep systems down at horizontal elevations, weep systems at any horizontal spot. So we see that a lot actually, where you'll have a drainable system, but then the weep hole systems aren't there, not installed, or somebody seals them up. That's another problem too. So that's a maintenance you don't want to do, right? So there's ways to do it that you do it right. So essentially the difference is a barrier system, you can't let water in or you're going to have damage because the water can't get out, and a drainable system gives the errant water a way to drain out of the system. And that's anywhere from stucco, EIFS, even brick has weep holes in a certain system. They all should have some way to get the water out if they're a drainable system.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. There's a few more questions, and I think you covered some of this, but how can we communicate to the board what projects are more serious or important than others? Obviously, I know that, what did you say? Water is malicious?
Water is malicious. Yeah. That's
malicious.
my saying,
Yeah, because we know water for sure, but if you can just kind of elaborate a little bit on that, because if you're having major issues, how do you know what to start on first? Because everything seems like it's just catastrophic.
Yeah, sure. I think skyward facing elements like on this summary is probably the key. Where you've got exposure to weather and water is going to be your major issues or potential issues, right? So balconies, roofs, courtyards, parking garages. And again, if you're not seeing damage, doesn't necessarily mean you probably don't have it. But if you've got indications of, like I said, efflorescence means water's getting behind. If you've got bubbling stucco or bubbling finishes or other areas like that, it means there's some sort of water getting in there. So again, that's what I would say is the skyward areas are your keys. Now, parking garages are always a big maintenance issue too, just because it's below grade and you've got water coming in, and they have to have traffic coatings, and they're below grade sometimes, meaning you've got soil pressures and water pressures against them. I think the key is, from my standpoint, everything can become a prioritization important item at the top. It just depends on how well they're performing and where the failure might be. I think the key is to have inspections done, right? Whether it's even the building, you have building managers and people that are out there all the time. They probably have the most knowledge on what they're seeing, and they would walk by it all the time. Is keeping an eye on when something changes and when something it could be an issue, and then being able to call a consultant and say, look, here's our issue. Is it an issue or not? right? And then that's where we, consultants, architects, et cetera, can help you prioritize and say that's not a big issue, or maybe it is. Let's do a little intrusive testing and see if water's getting in there or not. There's ways to investigate it. You can do water tests. There's things to look at and make sure it's not a catastrophe, especially if you catch it early, right? It's just one of those things you want to catch as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
This next question talks about new construction defects. In your experience, are these trending upward?
Oh, I think it's pretty. There's a lot of it, but there's been a lot of it for probably 20 plus years now. Anywhere you see big growth in cities that are growing fast, you see the most of it. So, of course, Dallas is like that, especially now. You see a lot coming out of COVID too, where projects stopped and started and changed hands and changed contractors. I don't know if it's trending upward, but it's definitely a very consistent part of our business. Let me put it that way. I think part of it is you have an inexperienced crews sometimes. You don't have great management on some of it. You have new materials people don't always understand. Developers don't typically, I'll talk bad about developers for a minute, don't typically want to spend the money to have quality assurance and make sure it's done right necessarily. So I do think it's definitely trending upward since 30 years ago. Trending upward in the last 5 years, it's probably been about the same for about, I would say, 10 to 15 years.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
There's another question that kind of talks about lawsuits. I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but the statement was regarding lawsuits. The majority of suits that you have seen, are they mainly settled or versus trial jury? What
Um,
seems to be the common
yeah,
theme?
it's pretty, I would say majority settle. I mean, I work on hundreds of cases a year and I only go to trial probably twice a year, if that. So I would say the vast majority settle. Most people don't want to go spend, a ton of time and money in court. So it's just a question on, what can you do with that settlement? And I think I talked about that earlier. That's the whole key with a
Right.
settlement is it means you probably didn't get all the money you needed, right? So maybe the litigation worked up and said you need to, it's $10 million in defects. Well, settlement maybe came in at, I don't know, 5 million, and you got $1 million that goes to the attorney, and now you're left with $4 million to potentially try to fix 10 million in repairs. So, or 10 million in damage. So that's a key of what we do a lot on our rehab side of going in and figuring out, okay, what are the priority items? How do you direct that money? Where should the money be concentrated? Okay, is it balconies and claddings mainly? Is it balconies, claddings, and roofs? And there's other things that can be reserved down the line. That's essentially what we're doing, right? We are deferring maintenance to some extent or deferring repairs. We're basing that on what the extent of damage and the likelihood of damage and how do you best work through that money, because you definitely don't have enough to fix it all, right? So that's why I say
Right.
most of it happens in a settlement, which means you don't have everything to fix all of the issues. So the best thing to do is prioritize and figure out how to reserve funds for the rest.
Great. Thank you. Another question pop up. Hydrojet, hydrojetting plumbing lines. Is this recommended and at what frequency?
Um, I don't know if it's necessarily recommended. If you have a problem with buildup, then it's one of those you probably have to do. And developing the frequency, it's probably yearly, I would think. I'd probably defer to a plumbing company that sees that all the time. I've seen some where you have plumbing that has some bellies in it, or where debris builds up. You may have to do it a little more often. In general, your plumbing systems, if they're done right, you shouldn't have to hydrojet them. But if you've got buildup due to a few bellies or deflections in the systems, you may have to do it every 6 to 12 months just to keep them clean.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Another next question. I recently had a vendor come on site to check out the roof of a property. They noted 3 to 5 years of deferred roof maintenance. They've also noticed that all leaks that are inside are coming from the roof. The property does not have hose connections to the roof for water tests. What should I do? What would be a next steps possibly on that?
Yeah, so typically visual observation of where the leaks are, and you try to tie that to, I mean, water's kind of hard to chase sometimes, but you can figure out which units or which areas are seeing the water, then you can go from there and track that up to the top. And then from there, you try to figure out, okay, where's the water coming from? It's normally visible, unless there's like a tear in the membrane or something like that. It's usually a flashing issue or something that's separated, something like that. And you can usually track that up. For a water test, yeah, you'd have to bring, if you don't have hose, that's something we typically bring a contractor in. Sometimes you can put a pump system in and pump it from the ground and test up top. There's multiple ways around it, but I would start with just visual inspection and try and figure out where you think the leaks are coming from, and then go to either to a water test, or you can actually do intrusive testing. Have a contractor pull open some sections and see if you can figure out where the water's coming from, and just try to, again, it's real surgical at first, just trying to sort out where the water is coming from versus having to tear the whole thing at this point.
I know
Awesome.
in my days as a consultant, we got really creative. It wasn't uncommon for us to go tap into a washer supply line or something similar and pump it up
Yep.
from an upper level unit. So
Yep,
yeah,
definitely.
good questions. And
Yep.
I think we're getting towards the end of the questions and certainly towards the
Yes.
end of our time. I do want to compliment Matt for such an incredible presentation, great content, great
Absolutely.
recommendations. I love the case studies in the depth. A lot
Appreciate
of the
it.
questions that we're seeing actually pertain to some forthcoming speaker series events. So please keep an eye on your emails. We're going to be putting on presentations related to construction defects, specifically related to legislative updates that are getting pushed through the House. So we'll be announcing those here in the coming weeks, and look forward to, continuing to provide great content for our boards. And my last plug here before I hand it back over to Nicole is, if you have, topics that you think would be great for us to go get an expert to train you on, please do send those to your on-site team, myself, your regional director. Find a way to get those to our organization, and we'll pursue that for you. So appreciate everybody joining this evening.
Yes, great topics. Thank you, Jack. Another way you can send questions to events@worthross.com. Again, that is events@worthross.com, and we can monitor those. So Matt, thank you so much for presenting tonight. Excellent job. And everyone, you should give yourselves a round of applause. Great questions that came in. This is a very hot topic. So I just want to remind everyone that once this video is uploaded to our YouTube channel, we will send out an email letting you know how to access this link and all of the videos that are in the speaker series. So just want to thank everyone for joining us
Thank you.
tonight. We appreciate everyone. I hope you all enjoy your evening. Take care
Thanks.
and good night.
Thanks for having me.